while we have a lot of really cool mechs in the Battletech universe, it has to start from somewhere. There has to be some originating design, chassis, factor, thought process that got humanity in the Battletech universe to decide, you know what, giant robots powered by a fusion engine is exactly how we should do business. And there is. There is the Mack Daddy Granddaddy in the form of the Inner Sphere 100-ton Mackie, the first official Battlemech designed and produced in the Battletech setting. What's up, everybody? I'm James. Welcome to Mechanical Mayhem, and welcome back to the Mech Bay. We're looking at an Inner Sphere mech, and not just any mech, but the one responsible for the entirety of Battlemech combat, you could say, in the Battletech setting, the Mackie. So this is the first official Battlemech designed midway through what would be called the Age of War in the 25th century, so 2400s, right? Particularly, we could say that this thing came into being to kick the crap out of tanks, right? So 2439, 2440 area is when the Mackie would really see field testing and truly be ready for combat. This thing comes in at 100 tons of screw you, that's why, and it hits pretty hard for its time period. Now, by any stretch of the imagination, its equipment, its loadout, its configuration, how it sits, will be considered primitive. Not because the equipment it has been supplanted, no, we still have PPCs and the like, but because it is technology of the 2400s, the 25th century. So the armor isn't as good, the power plant isn't as good, the equipment is not going to be as refined, and all in all, it is, by more modern time period standards of the Battletech universe, underpowered, understrength, maybe slightly over armored, but the armor is relatively primitive in comparison, so maybe under armored as well. But it was a proof of concept by a large margin, and it changed the face of warfare in the Battletech universe forever. So what are we looking at? Well, we're looking at something that's been described as a box with legs. Now, I don't know what kind of box they're talking about, but I suppose I could see some of that coming down. But we have so much more than just a box with legs to work with. What's really interesting about this mech is that it was designed, like I said, as the first real battle mech. There was nothing on the field of combat that it had to counter that was near peer, right? It was its own thing. And what also is really cool is that it comes in at 100 tons, the heaviest a standard battle mech will be for centuries. And that is so kind of real when you think about it, right? Think about computers or processors, right? TVs and the like, and just technology in general. It tends to start off rather big, right? Computers will hold rooms. Now you can have one basically in your pocket in the form of a cell phone. So things start off big, and then they get refined over time. The technology improves, and what was big can become small and even more potent. And that's exactly what we see with more recent battle mechs in the Battletech timeline. So starting off at 100 ton makes a lot of sense. You don't have to worry about trying to refine things. Just get it to work and be bulky and overbuilt. And that's exactly what the Mackie is. But on top of that, it works. It's not just, hey, we made this fidgety thing that kind of sort of steps around and kind of sort of does stuff. No, this is a full-on capable, tear the enemy apart, rip things apart, because nothing else is like me on the battlefield that goes to town. So the Mackie was designed, like I said, in a time when there were no mechs. So the way they field tested it was by putting it up against 4 remote-controlled Merkava heavy tanks. Now, Merkava heavy tanks are heavy, hence the name. They come in at 75 tons apiece. And this is a really good showcase of a mech that's 100 tons taking on 75 tons times 4, and absolutely with flying colors, destroying way more than its weight class, proving the effectiveness not just of a battle mech, but the whole idea of this style of combat. I see the Mackie would be the groundwork upon what other mechs would be built similarly to, eventually. Meaning it has an endoskeleton. It has that internal structure to hold things in place. It has the armor over it. It has the locomotion. It has the advanced technology of the time that will be refined over time. And this allows it to withstand punishment a basic vehicle just simply cannot. As well as dish it out and be more maneuverable, because being bipedal, despite you need some crazy advanced technology to be able to make it move like it does in the setting, would definitely have advantages as long as you sort out the whole balance thing and uneven terrain thing. So I went up against 4 Merkava heavy tanks, annihilated them, proving its worth. And when you think about it, that's the best kind of test you can do when there are no mechs to blow up as a test. So it would see battle and see production, and see production it did. One of the interesting characteristics of the Mackie is its cockpit, because the cockpit is produced in a way that is, or constructed in a way that is much heavier than a standard cockpit, making it one of the most heavily armored cockpits in Battlemech period, in Battlemech design period. It's also utilizing a special kind of one-way tinted, if you will, canopy of the cockpit. So typically you'd be able to see into a mech's canopy provided it's just not tinted or has some type of effect going on it. Now the games don't do this because that's a lot to do, obviously, in terms of making it visually interesting and zooming in and seeing a pilot in the mech chair, and that's a lot of stuff to do. But in essence, most cockpits you can look into and see a pilot in some capacity. The Mackie you cannot. It's basically a mirrored one-way finish, meaning the pilot can see out just fine, but nobody can see in. It makes the Mackie feel eerily unpiloted, eerily vacant of a human inside, truly looking like a giant robot. It's also probably the most heavily armed cockpit for some time, making it much more survivable as well. Despite that, it is more primitive armor, but if you would equate it to modern stuff in the Battletech universe, it would be a very survivable cockpit. So, what are the specs of this behemoth of the first mech ever? Well, it's 100 tons, so we're not going to be expecting crazy maneuverability. It has no jump jets, and it has a maximum speed of 54 kilometers an hour, which is 33-ish miles an hour. Definitely not winning any awards for speed, but it's the first mech of its kind. It's 100 tons. It's bipedal locomotion going at 54 kilometers or 33-ish miles an hour. So that's still impressive, especially being, hey, the first one. And not the fact that it's crawling at a snail's pace at like 4 miles an hour or something like that. But the fact that it's going as fast as it is, all things considered, I think is definitely a testament to the engineering happening with the Mackie. Now, with that said, we gotta have firepower, right? That's what makes it a battle mech. And what we have is, well, meager by more modern standards in the Battletech timeline, but at the time, absolutely devastating. And that is one particle projector cannon, which happens to be my favorite energy-based equipment, so that's cool to see. And has one autocannon 10, which is not a slouch in terms of hitting power. That and the PPC have roughly, in a sphere anyway, the same-ish range, so they can work in concert together quite nicely, and it has 2 medium lasers. So, 4 pieces of Wargear total to bring to bear on the enemy, but not bad. It is in a bipedal mech platform, able to fire off at things in, on a wide variety without having to do a full-on turret spinning around or turning the vehicle around and whatnot necessarily. And we can't forget, it is a 100-ton mech. It can just step on things like vehicles and take them out as well. So the firepower would be considered a little meek by more advanced assault mechs of the same weight class for sure, but being the first of its kind, it is an impressive array of firepower. With good staying power, because the autocannon 10 is the only thing utilizing ammunition. So, like I said, 25th century, the Terran hegemony is the one that created this, and would be the only one to have it for a good bit of time, allowing it to absolutely crush any enemy resistance that this force would face, because what do you do against a giant robot that you don't have any counter for aside from flood it with tanks, which isn't the best counter? Well, you steal it, right? And that's what would happen with the blueprints. Eventually, the capability to create this mech would become stolen and utilized elsewhere, and we would have mech-on-mech combat truly happening, and eventually the rest is history with development and designs and shrinking down the mechs and having the different weight classes, and well, the rest is Battletech as we know it. But this is the Mackie. This is what it did. Its design was all about utilitarian purpose. It's not going to win any awards, although I do like some of the art representation of it for sure. It definitely looks the age that it is, which is old, more primitive armor and equipment. However, the Mackie would not be forgotten. In fact, it would be cherished as this kind of symbolic might of technology, if you will, and of battle mechs. In fact, when Alexander Kerensky would take his great exodus centuries later with the bulk of the Star League, they would take a lot of Mackie chassis with them. The Mackie also is kind of referred to as retro tech. It's, by modern standards of the timeline, very easy to produce as is, and the blueprints are not lost. Meaning, during the very chaotic period that would happen in the Battletech setting, which we're not going to get into here, where mechs were considered quite a premium across the board, Mackies were actually being produced again. So we have this retro tech being produced because it was so much easier to produce than a modern battle mech. So Mackies went into production for a period of time, a short period of time, centuries after it was relegated obsolete, which is pretty interesting. Now, of course, if you were to modernize the Mackie and design it with all the modern accoutrements, if you will, it would definitely be able to bolster a much better array of equipment and probably be quite a fearsome foe once again. But if we transplant ourselves back into the time where this is the only mech in town and the battlefield is dominated by armored up infantry and tanks, this thing would have been a fearsome sight to see, especially if more than one was stomping around at the same time, blowing up whole regiments of armored vehicles. Like I said, it can take a beating for its time period. Obviously, its armor is not considered, it's considered primitive armor in the more modern time period of the Battletech setting. So, what about variants? Well, there are some. I don't really wish to get too involved in the variants of the Mackie because, well, it's not really something that would be too worth going over in depth, especially because some of these variants would happen much later on to try and beef up the firepower. So we see, in some cases, in the primitive, or I should say prototype version of the Mackie, there's actually not an autocannon 10, but an autocannon 5 instead, as well as a large laser instead of a pair of medium lasers. So the autocannon 5 doesn't do as much damage, but hits further in terms of range. So there's the large laser, kind of changing the concept of the mech a little bit, and that's the actual mech concept that would go in to the field trials. Production would see this change to an autocannon 10 and 2 medium lasers, probably to try and up the firepower overall. With the large lasers, range perhaps not really being needed in the beginning. There would also be a variant that replaces the autocannon with an autocannon 20, trying to make it hit that much harder, which would definitely would, but also drastically reduce the range. We have to remember heat dissipation, power plant capabilities, all this stuff at this time period is not going to be anywhere near the capability we have in this setting much later. But regardless of how you slice it, the Mackie is the granddaddy of all of the mechs, Omni-Mech or otherwise, and obviously it has been given its due respect. It's been in museums and other military academies. The clans have some on display. There's even one fully functional on Huntress that's kind of there as kind of like a homage to the past, if you will. And they're still combat capable. Probably not something you want to throw up against a modern Atlas or whatever, but definitely could throw down provided the weapon systems still work. And there was one instance where there was one from a military academy on display that only had a functional PPC, but it was fired up and utilized anyway in combat because, well, one PPC is better than no PPC, right? So there you go. In any case, sporting as much ton as a light mech because light mechs are for chumps. Apparently, you know, when you're looking at 100-ton Mackie, this thing has durability, and for its time period was probably viewed as unstoppable juggernaut when it first did battle. The most impressive thing about the Mackie is the secrecy behind it. I don't know how you can incorporate the amount of personnel in research and development of this thing to have it go completely silent on the radar until it pushed into production post trials. But the Battletech setting did it, proving once more that this is truly a fictional setting because there's no way the development of something like this would not be leaked in some capacity in modern day human interactions, right? We can't have a movie be made without things being leaked. You think we're going to have a giant super robot, the first one ever built, go around without some form of a leak or rumor that is pretty well based in some actuality? I don't think so. So whatever they did, whatever secret sauce they're able to make use of to keep this thing hidden in the Battletech setting, kudos to them. In any case, what are your thoughts on the Mackie? Did you know that this thing even existed as the first Battlemech? Would you like to see it? I think I'd like to see it in like a video game. Especially like an updated version would be kind of cool to see, or just to have it out there, because it's the whole reason we have Battlemechs, right? So it's pretty special in that regard, and obviously designed by the Inner Sphere, hence its spot as the first Inner Sphere mech to talk about, because I figured let's go back to our roots with the Mack Daddy of the Mackie. So thanks so much for tuning in and stopping by. Hit that subscribe button if you enjoyed yourself. Leave your comments on the Mackie and what you think. The next mech will be a clan mech as I go back and forth. And thanks so much for taking the time every day to look at this old mech with me. And until next time, take care.